Hello everyone. Ciao tutti. Come state? How you doing? Welcome to week 6 and lesson 5 of Sustainability in Society. A quick reminder, as I sent out the announcement earlier, that you have to remember you have to attend at least one of the health and safety meetings that are offered. There's two more. There are two more. One on the 14th of February and then one on the 30th of March. So you have to attend one of those. They're only an hour. It's on Zoom. So make sure you do that. That is absolutely required before you travel. And so you don't have to RSVP, you just show up. And so I put a link here on the homepage of the course. Okay, so let's take a quick peek at week 6, or lesson 5. Okay, so this is development and quality of life, another one of my favorite lessons. This is really another practical one. And I'll kind of go over what that means here in a minute. But I want to strongly encourage you to watch this video in the Food for Thought link or tab. One of my favorite videos on all the internet, in terms of especially sustainability. Just a great video, dense but entertaining, kind of impactful, emotional. Like it's a really interesting video. So I hope you watch it. And so in terms of lesson 5, we're going to go over development and quality of life. And the overarching question here really is, there's a couple. Number one, what does it mean to have a high quality of life? So what's required to have a high quality of life? Is it money? Is it life satisfaction? Is it good relationships? What is it? And so, I think a lot of us, our whole lives are seeking for a high quality of life. It's pretty normal. Um, and so the question really is like, what do the data show us actually constitute a high quality of life for people? What makes them happy? What at the what makes their life fulfilling and so forth. And so that's the overall theme. The other theme, which is I think really important, is if we care about quality of life and also development, which you can kind of use sort of interchangeably. But if we want to look at the development of a country and the people in a country, how do we know how well they're doing? How do we know how developed they are or how high their quality of life is? Like, do we just look at GDP? I think we've established that GDP is not enough. GDP per capita is not enough. So, okay, what are we left with? And that's kind of one of the major themes of this week's content. If we take country A, country B, we want to know, okay, which one of those is doing better, more developed, as they say? How do we actually measure that? What do we look at? And so that's a really central part of this week's content. And so we'll go over this in a few steps. So this first tab here, we have GDP and development. And so for this is really short. It's actually just a video. Interestingly enough, it's from Robert F. Kennedy back in the 1960s. So relevant today. It's another one of my favorite videos, and I hopefully you'll see why. He goes over some of the things that sort of building on a couple of weeks ago theme of, if you have a country that has a high GDP, you're like, hey, the people are doing really well. They're a wealthy country. Well, it's not always so easy. And RFK speaks to some of that, I think, in a really important way. Then there's a reading from the World Bank of all places, who's not actually really well known to be an advocate of true development and true quality of life for all people. They kind of usually cater to the wealthy countries of the world, but this reading is a really good one that helps you kind of unpack some of the assumptions about what makes a really highly developed country. And so there's a lot of key terminology here and some interesting concepts that you should recognize from past lessons. So that's a really good reading. Again, just another one pager. So this is not too heavy so far. And then finally, as I said, GDP, I think we've established is not necessarily the best way to measure how well somebody's doing. It's not the perfect metric. And so what are some of the alternatives? And in this section, in the last section, the development indices section, we'll explore some of those. So first we'll go over what's called the Human Development Index, which is one of the most well-known alternatives to just using GDP, um, and or HDI, if you will. And then the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, which takes the HDI, the Human Development Index, and it enhances it by looking at inequality. And real quick, HDI, what it does, simply, or I guess sort of fundamentally, instead of just taking GDP, it takes multiple measures within a country. So it looks at GDP per capita or wealth. It looks at effectively what amounts to education, so mean years of schooling and literacy rates. And that's number two. It's all combined into one. And then the third thing it looks at is life expectancy. So instead of just taking GDP, it takes three things that they can, and this is from the United Nations of what they consider things you can measure, and then combine those into one metric. So that's the HDI, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, just takes all of those, but it accounts for inequality. So let's say within a society, the average lifespan is 75 years, but you have the wealthy people living to 85 and the low-income people living to 65. So in that case, you'd have this gap in life expectancy based on certain, and in this case, income, in which case that would actually drop their inequality adjusted human development index because even though the average is high, if the lower income folks or lower socioeconomic status folks are down here and the other ones are up here, that's a problem and that's a sign of maldevelopment or the lack of development. So that's the first two that you go over. The third one you look at is as silly as it sounds, the World Happiness Report. This is a really serious document, actually, out of Columbia, or it started out of Columbia University. I'm not sure if it's still there or not, so it's certainly legit and robust. And this boils down all of this, like, GDP and health outcomes and life expectancy and schooling and education, inequality, all that stuff. And in order to measure development or how well people are doing, it doesn't ask them any of that. It doesn't actually look at those as part of the metric. All it does is ask people how they're doing. It's just about that straightforward. It's basically like on a scale from 0 to 10, where do you feel you are in your life? And so the premise there is that if you want to know how somebody's doing or if they have a high quality of life, you just ask them, right? So like my standard for a quality of life may be different from yours. And so if I don't value education and I'm just, rich as all get out and that's all I need and that makes me happy and I feel like my life is great, then that's up to me, I decide what makes me happy. And so that way you can objectively measure happiness, which changes with every person anyway. So why not? So that's what they do, and there's a lot more to it. But that's really how they measure happiness. And what they do is they take all these other factors, income and community bonds, and the sense of a fair government, all these other factors, and they look at how happy people are and then they try to look at all these other factors and say, well, we can attribute about this much of their happiness to income and about this much of their happiness to, being able to rely on others. And so they take all these other potentially confounding variables and they say, like, look, their life satisfaction is due this much to income and this much to the other thing. So they can sort of attribute where the happiness comes from. So the scale itself is very simple. How well are you doing? But then they do all this other side analysis to see why they're doing that well, but they don't actually ask them. So that's your happiness index. Pretty interesting. And again, this is something that is pretty well regarded. Some countries like France and Bhutan and some other countries are starting to use metrics like this, like just looking at happiness. So that's that one. And then this is not exactly a metric per se for development. So triple bottom line, something you may have heard of. So this is a way to evaluate how well a company is doing in terms of sustainability, right? So if you have the regular bottom line for a company, you probably know is just profit, right? So it's like we got to address the bottom line. Well, that has to do with profit. The triple bottom line is what's often called the three P's. So people, planet, profit. So you don't just measure your profit, you measure its impact on society or people, and then you measure your impact on the environment and nature, planet, right? So this is obviously very closely related, if not the same thing as the three E's, right? People, planet, profit is like equity, um, environment, and economy, more or less. But it's a way to measure that for businesses. And so there are triple bottom line corporations out there. You can Google it and find. Some of them may surprise you, and they actually do some measuring of these other two metrics aside from their bottom line. And then we'll also go over B corporations. Again, this may be something you're familiar with. I hope that you are, but I assume that you're probably not. And that's okay. That's why we're here, right? And so a B corporation is very similar, although it goes through more evaluations than just the triple bottom line. There's other things, but basically it's triple bottom line. But the really nice thing that I like about B Corps, and it's kind of hard, you probably have trouble seeing this, but there's this logo with a B and a circle in it. So if you're out, we all have to buy stuff, right? So if we're going to buy things, we should buy things that are as sustainable as possible if we care. And it's a complicated world. Like, how do I know that one product's better than the other? Like, it's hard. You got to do your research. Well, what the B Corp logo does is they do the research for you. It's a third party certifier, so they're not invested in anything but sustainability. Like, they don't work for the company. They nominally work for, sustainability purposes, and they're very legitimate, very robust, very prominent. A lot of folks know these in the business world. So if you're out shopping, you look for the B Corp logo, and you know that their company at least does a more than the average company to address sustainability from this holistic perspective. So you'll kind of dig into that a little bit, and I think that's a really, really useful designation. And like, there's a whole process that in order to get the B Corp logo, like you have to do these things, and if you don't do these things, you don't get the logo. So that's the last of those aspects of this week. And so again, this is one of those lessons, certainly applicable to everyday life in a lot of different ways. And I do hope you enjoy the content, and I hope you also um, yeah, appreciated the social and environmental justice content from last week. That was, I think, another really important lesson. Um, Social and environmental justice are finally getting their due on sort of like a national and international stage. It's starting to become a much more prominent part of sort of everyday language, which I think is really good. So I hopefully you have a better sense of what that is at this point. Okay, so that's it for this week and a quick review of last week, and I hope you enjoy the content.